and minister to us, and we'll minister to you in Jesus' mighty name. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
In tenderness he sought me, weary and sick with sin, and on his shoulders brought me back to his fold again. But angels in his presence sang until the chorus of heaven rang. Oh, the love that sought me. Oh, the blood that bought me. All the grace that brought me to the fold of God. Grace that brought me to the fold of He died for me while I was sinning, needy and poor and blind. He whispered to assure me, I found thee, thou art mine. I've never heard a sweeter voice. It made my aching heart rejoice. Oh, the love that sought me. Oh, the blood that bought me. Oh, the grace that brought me to the fold of God. Grace that brought me to the fold of Upon his grace I'll daily ponder and sing anew his praise. With all adoring wonder, his blessings I retrace. It seems as if eternal days are far too short to sing his praise. Oh, the love that sought me. Oh, the blood that bought me. Oh, the grace that brought me to the fold of God. Grace that brought me to the fold of God. The love that sought me. Oh, the blood that bought me. Oh, the grace that brought me to the fold of God. Grace that brought me to the fold of God. We've got an old one here and a little bit of a different arrangement. Just celebrating our total weakness that glorifies that grace of God. Rock of ages cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. Let the water and the blood from thy wounded side which flowed Me of sin, the double cure, saved from wrath and made me pure. Rock of ages, cleft for me. Let me hide myself in thee. Let the water and the blood from thy wounded side which flow be of sin the double cure, save from wrath and make me pure. Not the labors of my hands can fulfill the Lord's command. Should my passion never fade, and my efforts all be weighed, almost sin could not atone. You must save, and you alone, Rock of ages. No one takes your life, yet you died that I might live. Costly grace you freely give, Rock of ages. You have paid a price, you were blessed to cover me. Let me hide myself in thee, Rock of ages. No one takes your life, yet you died that I might live. Costly grace you freely give, Rock of ages. You have paid a price, you were blessed to cover me. Let me hide myself in thee. Nothing is my hand I bring, simply to the cross I cling. Naked come to thee for rest, helpless look to thee for grace. Wretched to the fount I fly, wash me, Savior, or I die. Rock of ages, no one takes your life, yet you died that I might live. Costly grace you freely give, Rock of ages. You have paid a price, you were blessed to cover me. Let me We praise you for your power to save, for your grace. We also rejoice as we look forward to the second coming. To see you exalted and coming in your power and your majesty. I see the King of glory coming on the clouds with fire. The whole earth shake, the whole earth shake. Yeah. I see His love and mercy washing over all our sin. The people sing, the people sing. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the rising up to take their place. Selfless faith, selfless faith. I see a near revival, stirring as we pray and sing. We're on our knees, we're on our knees. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the heal my heart and make it clean. Open up my eyes to the things unseen. Show me how to love like you have loved me. Break my heart for what breaks yours. Everything I am for your kingdom's cause. As I walk from earth into eternity. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna in
So maybe you heard that scripture earlier we were sharing during testimony, the scripture about coming to the Lord. And I feel there's someone here and you said, but God, I don't know how to come to you. I'm too far away. I can't hear your voice. I don't know what to do. And the Lord says, my ear is not too dull to hear, and my arm isn't too short to reach out and save you. And all you have to do is simply acknowledge God. The start is simply acknowledging God. That He's there, that He's true, that His word is truth, that He is the life, that He is the way, the truth, and the life. Just start with simply acknowledging God. That's the start. He will hear you. He will respond. He's like the father that goes out every day to the end of his road, to the side of his porch, and looks out and peers out and waiting for the son to return. So yes, He will hear you. Yes, He will see you. Yes, He will save you. He desires for you to come home. He desires for you to trust in Him. He desires for you to be part of His family again. So come back into His family. Come back into His good purpose, His good calling on your life. Just simply start by acknowledging that He is true.
More love, more power, more of you in my life. More love, more power, more of you in my life. More love, more power,
Therefore, I urge you, I even beg you, my brothers and my sisters, to present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable for God. This is your true and acceptable act of worship. Father, we thank you that it is you who works in us, giving us the desire and the power to do what pleases you. You work in us to will and to do according to your good pleasure. Trust in your help, Holy Spirit, to fill us with the love and the power that we need to seek the Lord, to worship acceptably. You are worthy. You Sing, I will worship. I will worship you with all of my heart. I will worship you with all of my mind. I will worship you with all of my strength. You are my Lord. You are my Lord. Father God, we love to worship you. And we love to come and to learn about who you are, to worship you with our mind. Like the famous quote that science is thinking God's thoughts after him. We're excited, Lord God, to worship you with our minds, to see who you are and what you have made. We love you and we praise you in Jesus' name. Hallelujah.
Man. Praise the Lord. Well, a little bit about Helmut Welke. Helmut's from Davenport, Iowa. Originally from Chicago, I think, or at least used to live in Chicago. And he is a retired engineer, industrial engineer. And he has quite a few qualifications that I will share with you in brief. He's a retired engineering manager with a Fortune 200 company. He has a BS and MS degree in industrial engineering from University of Illinois. And he's worked on national and international assignments. Let's see here, he was elected to the board of trustees of IIE in 2006, which is an industrial engineering society in the engineering profession, something like that. He's been honored as a fellow, very high honor, of the IIE Society in 2012. He's also the president of the Quad City Creation Science Association, and has been ministering in the area of creation science for a long time with them, I think 8 years, and been studying it for about 30 years. And he likes to speak overseas, Poland, Germany, France. He's spoken in Haiti. He's spoken across the United States. And we have him here tonight. He loves Jesus, and he's going to teach us something about astronomy. But he's going to introduce himself further. Here's Helmut. Give him a round of applause, please.
Okay, am I on? Ready to go? Well, my first name really is Helmut. Now, some of you heard my story when I was here in April, and I do really appreciate that you're letting me come back, so that's always a good sign. I enjoy it up here. It's my third time on the campus of the University of Minnesota, and I've really enjoyed it last night. And by the way, I will be back in the area talking at Northwestern University on Tuesday night with the Twin City Creation Science Association. That topic will be human genetics and the Bible, or DNA versus Darwin. It'll be going through the electron microscope. Tonight, we're going to do astronomy, going through space probes and telescopes and finding out what's out there and how that relates to the Bible. A little more about myself. How many of you saw me last time in April? Maybe about half of you. I was actually born in Germany. That's how I got a name like Helmut. Okay, so Helmut is an old German name for old Germans, which I am. But I grew up in the city of Chicago. My parents emigrated, so I speak German with a Chicago accent. And then I went to the University of Illinois, and I did have kind of a Lutheran background. But at the University of Illinois, I wanted to have a lot of fun besides my studies. But one of my classes was philosophy that I had to get with the requirements out of the way freshman year. And my philosophy professor at one point very early said, if you want to do science, you can't believe in God. And if you believe in God, you can't do science. So those are pretty harsh words for a young engineering student. And, I was at the point saying, yeah, it's one or the other, really. Either based on my upbringing, I was going to continue to follow this book because I personally believed it to be true. Or if there were too many questions that it couldn't answer, I would chuck the whole thing and not even pretend to be a Christian. Now, that was back in the 70s. I think that happens even more today. Fortunately, at that time, I got into a Bible study just to see what it was like with this different group. And then I also had a bunch of friends on my dorm floor that were familiar with the works of C.S. Lewis, Josh McDowell, and a few others. And in those days, one of the things that I found out is that the resurrection of Jesus Christ, from an historical, archaeological standpoint, history of the world, could be well backed up and reinforced as truth, that it really was an event in history. So what's now really considered evidence for a verdict, or evidence that demands a verdict, that kind of material, along with Frank Stone's book and More Than a Carpenter and several others, convinced me I could trust this book. So I became a Christian. I made sure I was a Christian anyway by inviting Jesus into my heart to forgive me all my sins and to restore to me a relationship that he wanted with me. And then I studied the Bible. So for the next 5 years, I got my master's degree as well as my bachelor's in 5 years in engineering, but I also studied this book more than any other single book. And I found it's true. In the last 38 years, I found it answers questions on how to raise children, how to handle marriage situations, interpersonal relationships, all of that. There's principles in there for that. But I also still had questions, even by the time I graduated, like what about radiometric dating? What about Neanderthals? What about the Lucy fossil? What about dinosaurs and fossils and transitional forms in general? And so I started getting some information from a group called the Institute of Creation Research. all PhD scientists, not preachers, but scientists with PhDs from major universities. And today, what I found is the creation, especially the young earth creationist movement, is driven by PhD scientists with their degrees from around the world. It's driven by science, not a pack of fundamentalists or whatever preachers. And you can rely on that. And if you have questions, the answers are out there. What I want to do for you tonight is just look a little bit at astronomy and show you some of the things. This used to be one talk with a little bit about the Big Bang, but there's so much material, I had to divide it into two. So maybe I'll come back, we'll talk about Big Bang sometime. This is going to be basically things about the Earth and the age of Earth and our solar system in general. But let's begin with the word. How many of you know Psalm 19:1? It says, amen, right. And we look up there's so many people, even non-Christians or people on the verge of becoming Christians, just look up there and say, wow, that's awesome. There has to be someone greater. And if he's the creator of that, just imagine how big and awesome he really is. I think that's why God made the universe as big as it is. I had a young atheist student tell me on a different campus, well, why did he bother making it so big? Couldn't he have just made the earth and, you know, have the few lights out there and the stars or whatever and made it a lot simpler? I think this is the answer. If we had a very simple solar system and nothing else, we wouldn't really understand just how big God is. And he has the capacity to know how many hairs are on every person's head at any instant of time, or hear the prayers of billions of people and keep them straight. He's more than just a big computer. He is the almighty creator of everything. And we'll get into that a little bit as we talk about the heavens. The heavens declare his glory, and that's why it's so big, is because God is even bigger. We're going to look at a number of topics. We're going to look at our planet Earth very briefly. It's designed to be inhabited. We're going to talk about our sun. It's a very special, stable sun. Everything we're finding out in astronomy is that our sun is unique, just like the Earth is going to be is considered to be unique. Then we're going to get into something called the early faint sun paradox. And I'm going to make you say it when we get there, okay? It's not as complicated as it sounds, okay? I'm going to walk you through that. Solar system, we'll just cover a few issues like comets, moon recession, some of the cores of the planets, and then planetary magnetic field is probably going to be the big one. That's amazing, awesome stuff has been happening in science from NASA space probes and everything else that comes together. In Hosea, God says, I made the earth and created man on it. It was my hands, figuratively speaking, that stretched out the heavens and commanded all their host. Another clue to the glory of God. And then there's our beautiful planet, the blue planet. We're looking, and I know there's, secular astronomers, they're looking hard for another planet that could sustain life. And right now, they continue to come up empty because every candidate they find is either too close to its sun or a gas giant like Jupiter or Saturn. Our planet is special. And you know what? Here's an amazing verse. Maybe you've read it and didn't really catch all of it. But think of Isaiah 45:18. For thus says the Lord who created the heavens, he is the God who formed the earth and made it. He established it and did not create it to be a waste place, but formed it to be inhabited. Wow, 3,000 years ago or more, we've got this Hebrew prophet that says this planet was created to be inhabited. Or through God, or through him, God says that. I didn't make the earth to be a waste place. It wasn't, an unformed disk full of methane gases and had to evolve for millions of years. but I made it to be inhabited. It had an oxygen atmosphere, and all our evidence from geology, the earliest rocks shows that is true. It was meant to be inhabited. It had life on it, and therefore it had all the oxygen in the atmosphere it needed. Here's Arno Penzias. He's a Nobel Prize winner in physics. And he said this, kind of an interesting correlation to what I just said. He said, astronomy leads us to a universe which was created out of nothing, delicately balanced to provide exactly the conditions required to support life. I'll get into that. Now, this really gets into what's called the entropic principle on how balanced the entire cosmos is, including our galaxy and our solar system and Earth and its relationship to the sun. That's what we're finding. It's also, even though they don't accept the reason, but they're finding that we do have a universe created out of nothing. And of course, that's where Big Bang Theory comes from. Big Bang Theory really is an attempt by scientists who do not want to believe in God. And so they come up with the idea that it exploded, that nothing exploded, and that turned into everything we've seen. Big Bang Theory is falling apart on its own weight, has many difficulties. It's really just a sitcom comedy show anymore. How many of you heard of the book, DVD, Privileged Planet? Nobody? It's an awesome book. It's just beautiful stuff from astronomy. And the main writer was Dr. Guillermo Gonzalez. I believe he was from Cuba, an immigrant. He became a brilliant PhD in this field. And he worked at Iowa State University. But then he made a mistake. He published this book before he got tenure. Now, his book does not say anything about God, doesn't say anything about creation. It just points out what astronomers already know in a nice format, that we are in the right place in the universe, especially when you get to according to the red shift. But that's a whole other topic. We are the right place of the Milky Way galaxy. We are in the right place of the solar system. We've got the right type of sun, more on that later. We're the right distance from the sun. We have a moon that's right and stable. Without the moon creating the tides at just the right size, it would make life pretty much untenable on Earth. That's just one of those little details. We have the right tilt to the axis for the seasons. The equator, therefore, will not get too hot, or the major habitable zones. And then we got the right amount of spin, the right atmosphere. And there's dozens of these lists of things, and he presents it in a very nice format. DVD has lots of pictures, of course. That makes it really amazing. But just because he pointed all these things out, and it kind of looks like it might imply intelligent design, not just of life, but intelligent design of our place in the universe. That's all it did, was imply that. And for that, he got expelled from Iowa State University, where he was a professor, because of his book. And again, it never mentioned God, but it obviously points to a God, I guess. An atheistic philosophy professor, kind of like mine maybe, only this one had a lot of pull at the university, started a petition to deny Guillermo tenure, only because of this book. Now, maybe in conversations, they also knew that he leaned towards accepting a God, or at least an intelligent designer out there. But that's all he did. So that's the battle to get this kind of information to the public. Having served on a board of a major engineering society, where all the other 2/3 of the board members are department heads and deans from engineering schools around the country, top universities, I know how academia thinks. And I see it every time I go on campus. It's kind of become a closed club, and it's very sad. They don't want you to get all the evidence. That's why there's hundreds of guys like me around the country starting little creation ministries, and that's why we also have the big three: Answers in Genesis, Institute of Creation Research, and Creation Missions International, Creation Ministry. Anyway, he got expelled. He got fired for just pointing out obvious things that we are now knowing for sure. But again, it sounds too much like the Bible. Psalm 74:16 says, "The day is thine, the night also is thine. Thou hast prepared the light and the sun." So not only was the earth created to be inhabitable, a big part of that equation, of course, is that we have to have a special sun. Now, our sun was once thought to be a very average star. Mid-size in heat and color output. And, you know, we're just one of many. We're nothing special. But observations of sun-like stars reveal that our sun really is special. It's different, mainly because of its stable size, its stability and not expanding, or huge flares that reach out as far as Mars, which other stars, our sun, do that are the size of our sun, and our solar system, and a special planet designed to maintain life. It's all working together in a series of spinning disks that makes our sun very special. What we have confirmed that this is true. It's not an average sun. It is different. Most stars are either smaller and dimmer, and others are just huge giants and extremely unstable. Observations of sun-like stars reveal that they generally are less stable than the sun, emitting super flares which could extinguish life on Earth. Can you imagine if one of those sunspots, those big flares, came out as far as Earth, and in one of those rotations it caught us? We'd be burned up. You know, the Bible does say this planet's going to be destroyed by fire in the end before God creates a new heaven and a new earth. Maybe that's the method. I don't know. Just a thought. The sun has been recognized as unusually stable. It's been dubbed by solar astronomers as the constant sun. Now, that's what astronomers are calling it, not me. Sun-like stars normally produce these bright flares about once a century. We've been able to observe this. And Galen Geiser, an astronomer at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, said, I think a consensus is emerging that our sun is extraordinarily stable, not just a little bit, but very much so. See, and then, okay, so that's the special part of the sun, but there's something else going on here. And that's my third point. Special Earth, special sun. Now, everybody say early faint sun paradox. What it's saying is that our early sun was faint. Not fainted falling over, but less bright, dimmer, fainter, a fainter light, okay? And it's a paradox. So let me walk you through this, okay? The sun, we know, is making its nuclear fuel is helium, and it's basically doing fusion. And as the nuclear fuel burns up, its core should shrink. So the helium that's there, that I would say God ignited, that's the only possible explanation, but more on that later, its core is shrinking because helium is being burnt up. Okay? And that would make the reactions occur more readily and burn hotter because the hydrogen atoms now have a little more room. They're not as densely packed in. They're in the middle of the sun. And they have a little more room. And if you know anything about atomic structures, they have a little more room to move around. And the sun, the fusion process, can actually burn hotter over time. Okay? So as helium is consumed, not helium, hydrogen is consumed, it starts to burn a little hotter. It gets to be a more efficient fireplace. If you ever had a campfire, if you packed all the wood together, it doesn't burn well, as when you build a campfire and you leave little spaces between the logs, right? You know, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, you all know that. If you leave little spaces, it burns brighter. It also consumes the fuel a little faster. But that's what's going on. And this is well known in astrophysics. As the fusion occurs, it should burn hotter and brighter. Therefore, as the sun ages, you know, at least in its up to its middle age, over millions of years, it's going to get brighter. And as it gets brighter, it's emitting more heat that reaches us. Now, that's coming forward in time. It's getting hotter. So what does that mean if you're going backwards in time? It's getting cooler. It's less bright the further back you go, right? So we know it's getting hotter. We know it's going to get cooler if you go backwards in time. That's why it's called the early faint sun. The early sun didn't burn as brightly. Okay? The early faint sun. Or the early... That's what we're going to get into. It is a paradox. It's a problem. Because if you go back far enough, you get all kinds of problems, and here it is. There is the energy by thermonuclear fusion. You got the beautiful created Earth there. You've got the sun. Energy by thermonuclear fusion. The core of the sun should alter the sun heat, and it should grow brighter with age. If the sun is 4.6 billion years old, and that's the current theory, it should have brightened by about 40% since ignition, however you want to call that happened. If it's 4.6 billion years old, we have a sun today, go backwards, we know enough about the fusion process, the size of the sun, how much heat, hydrogen we think it had. You go backwards, it'd be 40% less bright, less heat giving off if you go back to its very beginning, according to Big Bang theory. So today, the average temperature on the Earth is roughly 59 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 degrees centigrade, give or take. Now let's just go back a portion of the time, not the full 40%. But let's just go back 25% of the age of the sun to when basically the time of Earth supposedly was forming life in that primordial soup. Okay? 3.5 billion years ago, or 3.4. If you do that, then since then, there's going to be a 25% increase in the average temperature. That 25% increase, and you can do the background math, but basically, about the time, supposedly, that life was forming on the Earth, the early faint sun paradox says, and the Earth's temperature could not have been like it is today. It had to be cooler because the sun, in its early stages, was fainter, less bright. And that calculates to a temperature of only 27 degrees Fahrenheit. That's below 0 centigrade. What does that mean? Yeah. Most of the time, those oceans are below freezing. That's the paradox. What would that prevent if the oceans were that cold? The theoretical formation of life. It is a paradox. And yet, there's no evidence that the sun was fainter at any time in Earth's history, because everything we know about the Earth is that, if anything, it was warmer on this planet. You go back to the age of the dinosaurs and before that by the secular reasoning. So that's why it's a paradox. And they know this. That's why you don't hear about it. Paleontologists, everybody who studied ancient rocks and fossils, they say, if anything, the Earth was warmer in the past because of all that lush plant life and jungles that eventually became our coal seams and oil, but that means that's a paradox. It can't be if the sun was cooler, and that cool 3 billion years ago plus. So if you insist that the solar system is very old, then you have a planet incapable of starting life. That's why this is one of the reasons against evolutionary theory. Again, you don't hear about it. How many of you heard of the early faint sun paradox before? One. Okay. What are one of the suggestions to solve it? Yes. That's the only one they've come up with. I just saw a paper on it last year that, well, somehow there must have been some greenhouse effect, and it warmed the Earth just enough. But of course, scientifically, there's not much that you can say about it other than it's a guess to try to cover this up. Carl Sagan knew about this, and he was trying to work out the details far more than just saying there was a greenhouse effect, and he never finished it before he died. Because you can't just say that other than it's an appeal. It's a grasping for straws. See, that's one of the major puzzles. This is a Journal of Glaciology, a scientific journal, and these two PhDs said, one of the major puzzles of Earth's history is that the global average surface of temperature has been fairly constant over geological timescales within about 10 degrees of the current value, even though solar luminosity was as much as 20 to 30% lower. So they agree with those calculations 4 billion years ago, according to established knowledge of stellar evolution. To say greenhouse gases were just right to warm it enough then without really a good mechanism, and then the greenhouse gases go down as the sun is getting warmer, really gets to be incredulous, because you've got to balance those two changes just right. And it can't just be random. Or why would the greenhouse gases even have disappeared? That would then make the planet too hot. That's why it still is a paradox. So, this is just a couple of comments on some of these things. I don't know how much time I have yet, but when you go into the Big Bang Theory and you got these swirling gases spinning around, and inner gases form the sun, and leftover gases form the outer planets. And again, there's no physics that explains that very well. It's just a story. But that is the story. But even then, you run into a problem, because if all these gases do actually do that, okay? You got the sun forming, and then you got that early faint sun, and then you got these other gases going around, and they're forming planets about the same time. Well, everything we know, if that really could happen, then those gases would all be going the same way, and all our planets do go the right way around the sun. They all go the same way. But the planets, as they form, should also be spinning the same way. For example, Earth and Mars spin the same way as they're going around the sun. Okay, you got it? But we got two planets that go the wrong way. They're spinning this way as they go around the sun. And there is no physics, even if you believe the rest of the story, that can account for that. They're going the wrong way, and that's Venus and Uranus. Uranus actually spins like a bowling ball going this way. Everybody else is spinning this way, and then Venus is spinning that way. And that's even closer to the sun, makes it even harder to have changed. Oh, by the way, what do you think their answer is? What's one of the answers? Anybody? Impact, yes. Planetary billiards. Can you imagine if two planets collided? Either they were gaseous and they combine, or if they have cooled down, the impact would be unimaginable. Planetary billiards is the only answer that I've heard, and it makes no physical sense. So they're grasping at straws again. Now the sun itself, everything that we can calculate, if these spiraling gases could spin enough, and then gravity pulls them in together and it ignites by itself, it should be spinning much faster than it is today. Much faster. And yet it spins so slowly, it doesn't fit the Big Bang Theory and stellar evolutionary ideas. Moon recession. I think we'll get into that one a little bit. I'll explain that one. The heat rise of the sun indicates a young age. That's basically the paradox. And then finally, we're going to get into planetary magnetic fields. And planetary magnetic fields are all too young to fit the billion years old. I'll show you the comets. there's a comet. Look, there it goes. You know, it's coming from way out at the edge of the solar system, goes around the sun, and goes way back out again. We've been able to determine how much material they lose. And they lose a lot. If the solar system is billions of years old, then long-period comets should not exist. They would have lost too much material. Now, the evolution model postulates that they are being replaced from what's called the Oort cloud. These are the long-period comets, right? Oort, named for a guy who proposed it, Mr. or Dr. Oort, O-O-R-T. You know, he was just trying to be helpful, and so they named it after him. The problem is with the Oort cloud, in this case, it's never been observed. There's no evidence that it exists, and it has not enough mass in this theoretical Oort cloud to supply comets for billions of years. If it had that much mass, and it keeps sending in comets, I mean, that's the idea. There's this cloud of material way out past Pluto, which is now a planetoid, not a planet. And it's sending comets every once in a while, shooting them into the sun. That's the theory, but it has no evidence whatsoever. The other one that they call for the short period comets is the Kuiper belt. And the Kuiper belt supposedly is something closer. It is real. It's Pluto is considered part of the Kuiper belt now. And we have several what's called KBOs, Kuiper belt objects out there. But the existence of the Kuiper belt and the Oort cloud of comets has not been verified. We know there's something like a Kuiper belt. Oort cloud is totally theoretical. The alternative, of course, is the presence of comets may be evidence that the solar system is not as often as it's assumed. The big problem with the Kuiper belt, even as they've looked at it, if those are the source of comets, they're too big. They don't match what comets are. They're just objects that are way out there. We got Pluto and a few others. And there's no sign that they're making new comets. Let me get back to the Oort cloud. Tim Ferriss said, though the Oort cloud has yet to be observed, the theory accounts so well for the distribution of comets' orbits that most astronomers today just accept its existence with no evidence. Now, that's faith. Isn't faith something you believe without direct evidence? Or certainly no proof. You might have good guesses, but that's what it is. And yet people are getting PhDs writing their thesis on the Oort cloud. Many scientific papers are written each year about the Oort cloud, its properties, its origin, its evolution, yet there is not a shred of direct observational evidence for existence. Who do you think said that? Some crazy creationist? No. Better source, Carl Sagan, American astronomer. He said there's not a shred of evidence for it. He admitted it. And yet, this supposedly answers this question. Dr. Faulkner, a PhD in astronomy, he taught astronomy for 30 years at South Carolina. He said, since it cannot be detected, the Oort cloud is not a scientific concept. This is not bad science, but non-science, masquerading as science. The existence of comets is good evidence that the solar system is only a few thousand years old. There you go. There's all kinds of them out there. Here's the next one, recession of the moon. I mentioned that. How many of you know that the moon is going a little bit further away every year? Yeah, most people have heard that, recession. Okay? We've got this interaction of Earth's gravity. You got the action of the moon and the tides. The tides want to pull back on the moon, or the moon pulls back on the Earth. This causes the moon to accelerate. So what happens when you have this motion around the ball and you continue to give it energy? It wants to go away. If you let go of a ball on a string, right, and you're spinning it, you let go of what's holding it close to you, the string. In this case, it's gravity between the two. You let go, it's gone. Now, last we looked, there's no string between the moon and the Earth, okay? So it really is moving a little bit away. It's getting only away by, I think, 4 centimeters a year, a little over an inch. I forget the exact number. That one sticks in my head, though. So it's no problem if it's like 1,000 years ago, then the moon would have been about 100 feet closer, right? It's going away. Go backwards in time, it's getting closer, right? Got it? If you go back 1,000,000 years ago, it's 28 miles closer. It's starting to affect the tides a little bit. But maybe it's okay. Thing is, you go back 10 million years ago, then it's 284 miles closer. And you're really going through a period where it's starting to get exponential and not just linear. What's happening here? 1 billion years, 28,000 miles closer. And if you go back just 1.4 billion years, you got contact. Well, that would be a pretty cataclysmic event only 1.4 billion years ago when life was still getting going and forming into maybe simple-celled creatures and multi-celled, soft-shelled creatures. That would be a cataclysmic event. It's like this. You know, this shows you some of a little bit of the exponential nature of this. You go back, and you've got an event there that cannot be explained. So where'd the moon come from? Well, how about that fission theory? 1.4 million years ago, it spun off. Right? It's a valid theory out there. At least it's been proposed. Well, the problem is the moon is chemically different. We went to the moon. Amazing mission. And we brought back rocks. It doesn't work. Chemically, it's different. Plus, when you think about the mass of the moon and its size, how fast would the Earth have to go to break it off? Can you imagine what this would be like? I can't imagine it. It's so cataclysmic. So you can't do that. The physics doesn't work. And then if you did break it off, it would go off in chunks and not stay a nice distance away in a nice round shape going in its correct orbit that makes life possible, that makes the Earth inhabitable. So that's one theory. The other theory is the capture theory. Okay, it formed out there with one of those leftover gases, or it was an asteroid at one time, happened to be nice and round, and it came too close to the Earth, and the Earth captured it in its gravity. And that's how it, there you go, a tractor beam. Well, those early Martians on Earth were doing it. Now, it does have some real problems, because if it was spinning in out of control and happened to get close enough to the Earth, what happens when spacecraft come back to the Earth? In science fiction movies and in real life when the Apollo missions came back to Earth. Well, that's getting into the atmosphere. But what did they have to apply once they hit the Earth atmosphere at just the right angle? I have to decelerate. Otherwise, there's too much kinetic energy. If the moon just missed the Earth, and it was just a little too far out from this theory, then it would not be captured, and it would just maybe curve a little, but go back out into space or towards the sun. Yes. And if it got too close, what would it do? It would hit. But let's say it did come in at just the right angle, just the way that the astronauts had to steer their spacecraft coming back from the moon to right angle. You have to decelerate to slow down. If you did come at the right angle and not destroy the Earth and not go spinning past the Earth, what happens is the slingshot effect. You remember that? Some of the astronauts actually, science fiction movies, talking about slingshot past a planet or the moon to get enough energy to go back. That's what would happen. If you didn't have, the retrojets, and as far as we know, they're not on the moon, to slow it down, and then Earth could capture it, like a spacecraft. We have not found any jets on the moon that could have slowed it down when it came by the Earth. It's just too much of a problem in physics. That's the problem. So it could not have been captured that way. Co-creation, okay, the spinning gases just created at about the same time. So you got the same mix of gases. This has some of the same problems. Again, the Earth and the Moon are too different for that to have occurred, to have been formed from the same gases at the same time. And it's unlikely that the gravitational attraction would be strong enough to capture them just right. So we've got a receding moon, and the origin of the moon itself has no reasonable scientific explanation other than if you believe in God. And if you believe in God, then why shouldn't there be special things happening? If you believe in God, then God is a reasonable explanation. If you don't believe in God, then you've already rejected a possible conclusion. You see how that works? Origin of the moon. Okay, here's one of the technical papers. The origin of the moon is still unresolved. Nope, we have no clue. Because we don't believe in God, that's the only reason. See, the best explanation is the moon was created in its present orbit about 6,000 years ago. That fits the data. That fits the scientific data. It's not what most scientists say, but the scientists are just men and women, right? And they're fallible. They've been fallible. And they have their own agendas. The data says this is the best explanation. From moon recession to formation, how it could be there, and so on. And you know what? You get onto this, and it gets even better. Wait, there's more. How many of you heard of Dr. Russell Humphreys? 2 or 3? He is a physicist, research in nuclear physics, light magnetism. He's spoken around at NASA, universities, and churches. He's published 20 papers in scientific journals, numerous technical papers in creation journals that are also peer-reviewed. He was an award-winning physicist at Sandia National Labs. Award-winning physicist, and I have met him. I had him at my dinner table, actually. I had him in to speak. He's a genius, he really is. He came from a non-Christian home. He grew up basically an atheist. Didn't care for God and the Bible and all that stuff, and he was trained to be an evolutionary atheist. Sometime when he was a grad student at LSU, he however became a Christian, started reading the Bible, and realized that this fits. This fits the facts of science, and he started doing more research. He actually taught himself Hebrew so he could read Genesis 1 in its original language and get more of the nuances of what's going on there. That's just his background. Planetary magnetic fields. How many of you are old enough to remember Voyager 2? Okay, how many of you are old enough to remember, I think it's the second Star Trek movie, Captain Kirk, and beam me up, Scotty, right? The one, I think that's the movie where we had Voyager. Voyager was this thing coming out there, and it was coming towards the Earth, and Captain Kirk and the crew were going to have to take care of it because it looked like it was actually going to collide with Earth, or we didn't know what it was. Maybe it was something sentient, maybe not, but it was dangerous. What it is Voyager 2. Only they lost the paint job on the spacecraft, lost the OYA. And the aliens who found it just called it Voyager, and it called itself Voyager. And they decided that whoever created it were meanies and needed to be taught a lesson because we didn't take care of our equipment very well. So they gave it, super technology, and it was coming back to destroy the Earth, or it was something like that, and they had to stop it. That's Voyager. That's because the Voyager 2 probe was launched in '77, the year I got my master's degree. It passed Uranus in January of 1986. So you can see it takes a while to get out there. Along the way, it discovered 10 new moons and 2 new rings around Uranus. But at that time, one of the things we didn't know much about the outer planets was their magnetic field. And so everybody was busy in the astrophysics fields trying to predict what the magnetic field of Uranus was. All the NASA journals, NASA scientists, all writing from a secular viewpoint, predicted this magnetic field. In print, Dr. Humphreys put his best guess. But by then, he had become not just a Christian, but a young Earth creationist. He did all his calculations, and he had been studying now, got his master's and PhD in physics, so he knew how Earth's gravity worked. He did his calculations with the assumption of a 6,000-year-old universe and put it in print. That was pretty gutsy back in those days, in the early 80s. But everybody was doing it. Everybody was doing it. And you know what? He was the only one that was right. All of the NASA scientists, everybody else, just as brilliant as him, but working with an assumption of a billion-year-old universe, their answers for magnetic field of Uranus was off by a factor of 100,000 to millions. He was the only one right. Now, making a prediction like this fantastic, this is big in science. This is real big. You think he got the Nobel Prize for that? No, he more or less got expelled like Yarmo. Now, fortunately, he worked at an independent lab. He was not in academia, so he went on his merry way, and he's one of the ones that says there's tens of thousands of young Earth creationists with PhDs, of scientists out there. But wait, there's more. There's more. When we first went to Mercury, everybody thought, everybody being anybody who even remotely believed in billions of years, said, you know, Mercury is so small, if it ever had a magnetic field, it should be gone. It should be zilch. It's just a hot rock, at least the side that faces the sun, and super cold on the back and nothing else to it. So we went there, and we found it had a magnetic field. Oh, they scratched their head. Oh, my goodness, it shouldn't have a magnetic field, but it's got one. We could detect it. We could detect it. And then Dr. Humphreys did it again. He wrote a research paper and actually said, now, according to my model and magnetic fields, yes, if it's only 6,000 years old, it should still have a magnetic field if it had one when it was created, but it should be declining at this rate. And if we ever go back to Mercury, we're going to find it significantly reduced. Okay? Now, the secularists would say, okay, it's got a magnetic field. We're not sure why it's still there. But obviously, if it lasts 3 billion years or more, it's still going to be there 50 years later or 40 years later, right? Well, he put it in print again. And he said it's going to be much less, and we're going to be able to detect it. In 2003, the first was Mariner 10, where we found the magnetic field. In 2003, we found it, and it matched his half-life of what the magnetic field should be. Excuse me. If it's got a half-life, and you go back to roughly 4000 BC, and it was created there, and he's got his own theory based on what God says, how the planets would have been formed with a magnetic field, and then it's slowing down after the fall. Everything is decaying, and you get to it. He predicted that it would decline at this kind of rate. Mariner measured it up here. The magnetic moment is up here, and that's the plus or minus the amount of statistical error from our measurements at that time. He predicted it would be declining significantly. The Messenger mission measured it in 2008, and then we got some better data in 2000, I think a couple years later, 2011. But he said, you know, look it, this is science. This is predictive science. A NASA space probe is supporting a 6,000-year-old biblical age of the solar system, not just the Earth. My predicted 4% increase in only 33 years is hard for evolutionary theories of planetary magnetic fields to explain. And in fact, by 2011, we had even better data, and it had weakened by 8%, really. This is in 36 years from the 2011 updates. And that supports very closely his prediction in a 1984 paper. The fast rate of decay implies the crust was magnetized only a few thousand years ago. This is getting to be quite the pattern, isn't it? Now, most of you probably not have heard of Spike Spisaris. He's not a household name. I know Spike. He's out from Portland, and he was an atheist evolutionist, just like a lot of us are taught when we're young. He also worked as an engineer for the United States, the military side of our space program. He entered that program as an atheist and an evolutionist. He left it as a Christian and a creationist. He has produced a set of DVDs that are just awesome. And I'm going to show you just a couple of things that are in them, and I've got the DVDs here available. But basically what happened is, while he was working, a friend, somebody in the next cubicle that he got befriended, and over coffee breaks started talking to him, and mentioned that he goes to church, and Spike said, nah. And then Spike kind of was interested in some science stuff. They were all interested in NASA material, like what Dr. Humphreys was looking at. And Spike eventually started looking at it, did his own research, got some more journals from his friend, and he ended up becoming a Christian and a creationist. Spike has produced these 3 DVDs that are really awesome. The first one's like 100 minutes. The second one is 60. The third one, which deals with Big Bang Theory, is almost 2 hours. Let me just show you some highlights. Everything we've done and measured about the planet Jupiter shows that it shouldn't exist, not where it is. It's got too much mass, it spins too fast, and it's too far out. The time required to form such a large disk would require at least 10 million years. Okay, no problem. Maybe even 100 million, still no problem. But the thing is, when we actually do the physics, a dust cloud like this hanging around waiting to form into a planet over 10 to 100 million years wouldn't last in the solar system the first 5 million. It would dissipate. The dust particles just don't wait around that long to coalesce into a planet for even a fraction of the time required, especially when you get up to the 50 million year range. Jupiter is pretty much the same thing. Richard Kerr said, talk about a major embarrassment for the planetary scientists. The blazing away up there in the late evening sky are Jupiter and Saturn, the gas giants that account for 93% of the solar system's planetary mass. They're so big. But no one has a satisfying explanation of how they were made, unless you include God in the story. Saturn also should not exist according to evolutionary theory. Neptune should not exist according to evolutionary theory. These are just too much material way out there. They cannot form as planets according to everything we know about stellar and solar system evolution and physics. Physics, that's why physicists like Dr. Humphreys, there's many more than Dr. Humphreys, who are young Earth creationists. So what's easier to believe? Think. That nothing exploded into everything. We've got an expanding universe coming from that explosion, and out of the chaos we have order and hopefully some reason here on Earth. Logic? Or is it easier to believe that in the beginning God created, especially when you start learning some of these facts? I say it is. So here's what I just tried to give you tonight, and then I'll take some questions. A planet designed to be inhabited. We have a very special, stable sun. The early faint sun paradox continues to be a problem. Can't just appeal to global warming at the right time and the right amount at the right time periods as well. Solar system, you got several issues there, and there's more if you want to get into the details, especially with the Spike Spisaris' DVD. And I think the big one is planetary magnetic fields. They have no explanation of how they formed other than they were designed that way. And in a winding down universe, a winding down Earth, they are declining at a rate, like Mercury, at a rate consistent with a young age. These are not made up numbers. You can verify, people have verified this, you can get the data. Now remember, I'm an engineering manager. Well, I'm retired 1 year now. You come to me with a proposal and an idea, and I say, that's a great idea, that's interesting. Maybe we'll spend a couple $1 million on your idea. But where's your data? Where's your backup? Have you done all the studies? Have you dotted your T's and I's? I can't just go on a story and bet $2 million on it, or my whole life on it, without data. I want some data. And this is what the data says. And it's only the beginning. I can only give you a tip of the iceberg here. Dr. Robert Jastow was the founding director of NASA's Goddard Institute, director emeritus of Mount Wilson Observatory. He said, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, in other words, materialistic reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountain of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. And as he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. That the evidence points to a creator God. And this is just astronomy, and it's only the tip of the iceberg in astronomy. There's so much more. What I found in my 30 years of doing creation science and now talking about it for 8 years, just to get the word out, every branch of science confirms, backs up this book. That's why you should study it. And if you're not a believer, and I don't know all your backgrounds, if you're not, get into a Bible study. Ask questions. God invites us to ask questions. You have doubts, that's okay. But don't keep them to yourself. Find out. Do some research. The answers are there. You just got to be able to listen to both sides, though. Here's the DVDs I mentioned from Spike. I do have them in a box underneath the table. The table is too small to get them out there. If you want them, we'll get them. I got a special deal for you. Normally the first two, which are older, $12 each. The last one, which deals with Big Bang and our created universe, it's $14 if you just want one of them. But I'll make you a special deal, get all three for $30 tonight. I also want to tell you about another deal. Some of you looked at this book last night. If you don't have any creation science material in your home library, this is a very good book to start. It's by Dr. Gary Parker, Creation Facts of Life. Dr. Parker was an evolutionist. He has a PhD in biology and graduate studies in geology. And he made fun of the creationists in his department. And then they said, well, why don't you examine the evidence? Get all sides. And he became a young earth creationist and probably one of the most prolific writers and speakers in the last 30 years. He's still alive, but getting up there. Tonight, this book normally retails $12. We sell it for $11. Tonight only, if you want it, I got it brought in a whole bunch from the car, $5. Get your creation science library started. He covers everything from DNA and genetics, life, mutations, adaptions, natural selection, fossils, the geologic column, a little bit of evidence from the Grand Canyon on that. And these are some freebies. I've got limited numbers. These are brochures I brought.